ODT is a Tomb Raider clone launched for the original PlayStation in 1998. Well, I call it a clone, but this is actually a really unique and forward-thinking game. I mean, what other Tomb Raider clone from this era can you think of that also has RPG elements, a magic system, and even a bit of survival horror thrown in there? But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. But all of this just to say that ODT is an incredibly unique game that you most likely never heard about. ODT was created by... actually I'm not sure. Every website I could find would state Psygnosis, the same studio behind games like Wipeout, Colony Wars, and G-Police. But as far as I know, they were only the publishers. I mean, the game itself states that it was created by a studio named FDI, which I've never heard of, but further inspection reveals that they're based in France and also created another Psygnosis published game, Adidas Power Soccer, which is so not my type of game. Well, I mean, I did find the lead programmer's development history, where it seems he worked on an Amiga game by LODCL called Disc, as well as ODT. But he hasn't created a game since then. Well, that is, except in 2018 when he came back to create a game called... VR Paradise? Gentleman's Club? Give me a second. Checks out. So, yeah, this studio is a complete mystery to me, which wouldn't mean much were it not for the fact of just how utterly unique ODT is. In fact, for years, I've held this game as a PS1 hidden gem, one which I rarely see mentioned anywhere. And the few times I do see it mentioned, it's either a review from 1998 stating how terrible the game is, or someone who played the game back in the day and agrees how much of a hidden gem it was. As you can imagine, I belong to the latter camp. ODT takes place in a steampunk-like world where you're on an airship carrying a mysterious green pearl, which your captain narrates that is of extreme importance, but doesn't actually go into detail about how or why. In fact, part of what I like about the game's plot is how little it tells you, leaving you to explore this world and draw your own conclusions. But I'll get to that. Now granted, the manual does provide some backstory, as it says something about an epidemic in Cali. Topical? But I honestly think this is one of those games where I feel it's better to simply not read the backstory and just absorb the plot as it happens. Anyway, the green pearl has some sort of weird reaction and causes your airship to explode. From there on, you can select one of 4 characters, 6 if you apply cheat codes. And it's your job to explore this region, survive its hazards, talk to and rescue people, and somehow escape. Hence the title ODT, or Die Trying. Yeah, I know the title's terrible. Now, as mentioned before, this game is a Tomb Raider clone. This means you're expected to jump, hang from ledges, climb, and crawl your way through each level. And while it's not as in-depth as Lara Croft's outings on the PS1 or Saturn, it offers a pretty decent alternative to that series. But now is when we really get into what makes this game so special. As I've mentioned before, ODT also incorporates RPG and survival horror elements into its gameplay. This means that for every enemy you kill or object you break, you'll gain experience points. And then you can use said experience points to increase your armor, weapons, or spell power. Now granted, your choices seem limited, but there's a bit more to it than just that. Increasing your armor makes you take less damage, obviously, but you also start causing more physical damage. Placing experience on your weapons allows you to upgrade them, and spell power will allow you to learn more spells, as well as improving them. But now, here's the thing. In order to upgrade any of these features, you'll also need to carefully explore each stage, and make no mistake, these are some large levels. So if you happen to come across a blue weapon upgrade, for example, you can either use it now to upgrade your blue weapon, and this improvement will be persistent, meaning it will stay with you until you complete the game. On the other hand, if you don't have the necessary experience to improve your stats, you can keep them in your inventory and save them for a later level. Though the issue now becomes inventory management, as you can only hold a limited number of items, and sometimes you might need to drop something in favor of a plot-centric item or key. There are a total of 4 weapons in the game, and although every character can use all 4, some are more attuned to others. In fact, selecting different characters at the start will change your initial item loadout, as well as the items you find as you explore each level. They'll all be in the same locations, but you'll get different stuff depending on who you play as. So, for example, Ike, the more balanced character, will be more attuned to the blue gun, which is your standard shot, while Max will mostly run into flamethrower ammo, which is great against organic beings, but not so much against machines or turrets. When playing as Julia, I'd run into a nice mix of blue and green ammo, the latter of which works great against machines. But it did make my life more difficult when I was exploring the jungle village. In fact, I really like how each character plays differently because of their RPG stats and differing weapon loadouts. When I played as Julia, another balanced character, I kept focusing on a mix of guns and magic to make my way through the game while generally avoiding melee combat, as she was pretty weak at it. Max, on the other hand, has low magical stats and is always low on ammo, so I focused a lot more on a mix of physical combat and useful items like mines or grenades to dispatch my foes. I know the whole point of having different characters is to play differently, but then again, how many Tomb Raider clones do you know that do something like this? As I mentioned before, this game also has a magic system. Basically, as you explore the game, you'll come across earth, air, water and fire crystals, which you can collect to learn new spells or upgrade existing ones, so long as you have the necessary experience. These can go from healing spells, to shields, vampiric abilities, stunning abilities, that sort of thing. And though they're pretty weak at first, they soon become incredibly useful so long as you have enough mana. And you collect mana by finding mana items strewn about the levels like you would ammo, healing items, or grenades. Another cool thing about ODT is how everything is persistent. Every weapon, ammo, or item you pick up, upgrade or install, or even each enemy you kill, will stay that way until the end of the game. So if you pick up every item in a level and kill all enemies but then die due to a mistimed jump, you'll lose a life, but everything else will remain as you left them. This is really helpful when clearing rooms of enemies. But make no mistake, you need to watch your ammo and health items carefully. Just like with any survival horror game of its time, you'll find plenty of weapons and items in the beginning, but you'll also need to learn to be frugal with them. Yes, you'll bring all of your weapon pickups with you to the next levels, but this game is hard. Really, really hard. And you will need every bit of ammo and health you can get your hands on. Especially in the later levels, when the difficulty really begins to spike and items become much more difficult to find. In fact, a good rule of thumb for ODT is to explore everything. And if a series of jumps seem even remotely possible, it's usually a good idea to try them out at least once to see if you'll find anything you can use. So it's often a good idea to either avoid fights or take them out with melee attacks to conserve ammo, gain experience, and hopefully not lose health in the process. And that's something I really like about ODT. The mix of genres really helped create an elegant game which is equal parts Resident Evil and Tomb Raider, with the RPG mechanics tying them together for a truly unique experience. Another thing about the game is that it's also part collectathon, as if it didn't have enough genres already. So, remember when I said that your rare ship crashed and now you gotta survive? Yeah, well, you also gotta explore every nook and cranny to find gas tanks to help inflate your ship. And you also need to collect the pieces for the Green Pearls container. And there's also this thing called the Psyche, which is optional, but if you collect them all, you do get this cool Easter egg where you visit the recreation of Psygnosis's offices. This does not sound right. Of Psygnosis's offices. Jesus Christ, I cannot say these two words together. Psygnosis's offices. The offices of the company previously known as Psygnosis. The Psyche may be optional, but the other two will impact on whether or not you get the good or bad ending. So it is a good idea to watch out for them. In a way, this collectathon mechanic, coupled with the exploration, puzzle solving, and keys, kind of made me think ODT is an evolution on the collectathon games from the 8-bit Amstrad and ZX Spectrum days. You know, games like Batman, Nightlore, Solstice, that sort of thing. Except, instead of having one big world to explore, where you can freely travel back and forth to pick up any items you might have forgotten, here you have several massive levels to explore, and while you can go back and forth as you please within these levels, once you've cleared one, that's it, you finished it, and you can't go back to collect anything you might have missed. And throughout all of this, I have to say, these levels are a joy to explore. I mean, from a graphical standpoint, ODT is clearly average, or maybe even below that. But just look at the sheer size and scope of these worlds. Or, you know, imagine them, as the draw distance is also kinda narrow. But what I mean is, I love how big and thematically different each stage is. I loved exploring them as a kid and wondering what all of these locations meant as I tried to puzzle the pieces together. From the mosaics and stage designs, which can go from steampunk railways to heavy metal machinery and even dense jungle villages. Or the fact that a lot of the story seems to be conveyed to you through the environment itself. There were many times where I found myself wondering the significance of what I was looking at. Like, for example, what is this jungle village? And why are there no villagers? But then, on the following level, you'll come across a prison and you can free the captives within. So, even though the game never states this directly, we can assume these are the people who used to inhabit here. In a different level, you can break down a wall to reveal a series of rooms filled with chairs and a desk. I always assumed this was a gathering spot for fugitives or a meeting place for those who resisted enslavement. Again, none of this is ever specifically told to you. But then again, why would the developers go out of their way to create environmental objects that can't be found anywhere else in the game except within these secret areas? I've always been fascinated with this sort of environmental storytelling. Similar to what you'd find on games like Soul River or Shadow of the Colossus. And though this game isn't as good as those, it still manages to pique that side of me. So I think you can see why I've believed for 20 years that this was an amazing hidden gem on the original PlayStation that no one ever seems to talk about. Unfortunately, like many PS1 games, ODT is starting to show its age, and because of that, it's becoming a bit hard to recommend it these days. For starters, it could have used a better tutorial. A lot of people who played this game completely skipped the tutorial area without realizing it. Basically, when you start the game, there's this red arrow which points to level 1. But if you climb this wall instead, you'll see a green arrow which points to the tutorial area. Although, calling this a tutorial area is perhaps being a bit too kind. It's basically a level where you'll have to use every platforming skill the game has. But the game doesn't even tell you how to perform these moves. You're just kind of supposed to guess. Or, you know, read the manual, but who does that anymore, right? At least, you will run into the other 3 characters you didn't pick, which is kinda cool. The graphics are also pretty poor. Yes, it's cool we have these large open areas to explore, but the textures, animations, and really the overall graphical look is pretty average for a PS1 game. Maybe even below that, not helped by the short draw distance or the odd graphical glitches. But perhaps the two biggest offenders of why I say ODT is now showing its age are the camera and the controls. Folks, if you're familiar with Resident Evil and Tomb Raider tank controls, we are deep behind enemy lines right now. Walking a straight line is difficult. Strafing is difficult. Dodging enemy attacks is really difficult. And the camera will always get in your way. Combat is most likely the worst part of the game because there's no way you can have any sort of decent, quick-paced combat. And to me, it seems the creators noticed this, because the boss fights are so incredibly lame and boring, whose defeat will often hinge on a gimmick. And finally, I don't know, I feel like the game gets progressively less interesting as you move forward to each level. From what I understand, the developers were rushed to meet a deadline, and I think it shows as some of the later levels don't feel quite as intricate or interesting to explore as the earlier ones. It's not to say they're bad, but they don't quite have the same spark as the early ones. Overall, I feel ODT was a great hidden gem for the PS1, which is sadly showing its age. It's still an incredibly unique and forward-thinking game, as it mixes Tomb Raider-style gameplay, RPG mechanics, and survival horror into a single title. But dealing with the camera and controls can be quite frustrating. I guess you could say ODT has now become something of a flawed gem, or uncut gem, as one of my Twitter followers put it. Thankfully, it seems a complete copy of the game is still pretty affordable, so it should not be too difficult to get a hold of it. So I say, you should at least give ODT a try, as I feel it's still a game worth experiencing. Hey everyone, thank you for watching Stikka's Retro Corner. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this video. All that fun social media stuff. And you can also support me on Patreon. It may not seem like it, but even $1 is a really big help in keeping this channel going. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!